Chapter 86. Lu Shu suddenly thought of his past wish to buy the house over. If he could sell 2 magical stones every month, wouldn't this wish be fulfilled very quickly? Since he was a student of Daoyuan class, the origin of his magical stones was not in doubt, so there wouldn't be any problem with him selling them. At least it's better than selling the refresher fruit. Should someone find out about him selling the refresher fruit outside, he would be risking his livelihood. Lu Shu thought to himself, this was like a sort of subsidy to him from the Daoyuan class. However, he couldn't put it this way to Jiang Shuyi. He thought and said, I want to know the price for the stones first. Training emphasizes on being focused. If I have to worry about my own livelihood and survival, I'm afraid that might take a big toll on my training. Knowing Lu Shu's family background, Jiang Shuyi naturally believed him. Even then, he felt that this was not right. After selling the magical stones, do you know how much longer and harder you have to train? Wouldn't there be another distribution next month? You tell me how much money one can fetch me first. Lu Shu felt it would be better to deal with someone like Jiang Shuyi or have him help with his business. If he really went to the Golden Foundation's forum to sell, with the nosy and gossipy people there, who knew what would happen? Jiang Shuyi thought for a moment before saying, due to the heavy control of the stones, they are extremely valuable. That's why each stone costs approximately $100,000 each. There's none on the market and the price is dictated by the seller. Lu Shu was stunned. It's worth so much? It can't possibly be true. He then thought again. Not a single stone could be found outside, and this was the first time Daoyuan class was distributing it. It is indeed very rare and valuable. He continued thinking, one small cycle of training would only result in an increase of 100 pounds of strength. It was not very worth it to give up $100,000 for it. After all, once a star in his celestial map is lit, the amount of strength he would gain far exceeds that. But other people would not think this way. What if it was someone in the Daoyuan class with a lower aptitude and a rich family? This $100,000 is peanuts to them. If $900,000 could allow their child to improve his skills to a class E, not only would the child be able to practice new skills, he would be able to be the alpha of Daoyuan class and lead it. Why not? Thinking from this perspective, $100,000 did not seem as expensive anymore. Do you want them? I'll sell mine to you if you want, Lu Shu said to Jiang Shuyi. Jiang Shuyi hesitated before replying, this amount can't be settled by me alone, wait for me after school. Lu Shu pondered for a moment. Jiang Shuyi was right, it would be too extreme if a high school student could just take $200,000. At this stage, even if someone comes from a rich family, there were still some people who don't even spend anything in a month. He then quickly said, but we can't have that price. How about this, you can have both for $240,000. Since it was something which had a price without the market, it was normal for its price to fluctuate. But this was not the main reason for him asking for that price. The most important reason was that $240,000 could allow Lu Shu to buy over his house. Never in his life did Lu Shu save more than $10,000. To be able to have $240,000 suddenly gave him a feeling of surrealism. This felt unrealistic, yet it fueled the hope he had towards life and his future. The completion of his goals one after another, to build on his life he worked so hard for. If he could buy the house, he wouldn't be depending on someone else for a roof over his head. He wouldn't have to care about anyone's dirty looks. He wouldn't have to worry about being chased away. Even if he had to sell tofu for the rest of his life to provide for Lu Xiaoyu, he would be content. Coughs, those were just passing thoughts. If I could train, I would still train. That way, life would be much more meaningful. After school, when most people had left, Jiang Shuyi made a call in front of Lu Shu. A classmate of mine wants to sell 2 magical stones. $240,000. Lu Shu heard a stern yet posh voice over the phone saying, bank number. Wow, that was straightforward. Lu Shu gave his bank account number, and Jiang Shuyi ended the call. Lu Shu passed the magical stones over to Jiang Shuyi. Nice working with you. The money hasn't been transferred to your account yet. Aren't you worried I might rob you of your stones? Jiang Shuyi asked curiously. I trust you, Lu Shu waved. Goodbye. And left. He had to rush to the ATM at the bank to check if the transaction was through, leaving Jiang Shuyi dumbfounded on the spot. Handing the magical stones over directly was a matter of trust, but it was also a sort of doing Jiang Shuyi a favor. After all, he had learned much from Jiang Shuyi during their time together. $240,000 exactly. Sitting idly in his bank account. As he stared at the chain of numbers on the screen of the ATM, that feeling of disbelief and surrealism resurfaced. He really had $240,000? He and Lu Xiaoyu no longer need to depend on someone else's roof? Lu Shu wasn't considered as very capable. Even after leaving the orphanage, he could only make ends meet by selling his cooked eggs. At that time, he didn't even have a bench and could only squat beside his little pot while waiting for strangers to buy boiled eggs for $1.50. In front of his sister, he couldn't put up the respectable character of an older brother. Lu Xiaoyu was never able to resist the temptation of good food, but Lu Shu always gave in to Lu Xiaoyu's wants. Even if Lu Shu continued giving Lu Xiaoyu a better life. But he was already working very hard. In the past, he used to think that if he became rich in future, he would throw some money at his parents if he ever bumped into them to show how well he was even without their care. He didn't think that way anymore. His entire world revolved around Lu Xiaoyu and himself. Lu Shu, standing in front of the ATM, looked up at the night sky. His celestial map, as if one with the stars above, started consuming the essence of heaven and earth. He suddenly had a question in his mind. Wasn't it only Class A metahumans who could communicate through heaven and earth? He could use the stars for training. Does that constitute as communicating through heaven and earth? That night, Lu Shu did not mention the buying of the house to Lu Xiaoyu as he wanted it to be a surprise. He even went online to check if an underage individual could legally buy a house. After all, a contract had to be signed. He then confirmed afterward that underage individuals of age 16 to 18 could exercise their civil rights to possess a house, if they did not depend on the finances of their parents. He fitted that description exactly. Which orphan had parents? His entire life was built upon his own hard work without anyone to depend on at all. Since this was the case, Lu Shu was at ease. Who knew what Lu Xiaoyu's reaction would be when she finds out that they own their own house? Their landlord used to justify increasing the rent by saying that he would be better off selling the house if the rent stayed the same. Evidently, he had the intention of selling the house. This was also why Lu Shu had always thought that buying the house was very important, only to be held back by the high inflation of the price of houses. Luckily, this was considered to be a third-tier small city. Chapter 87. Those who have never lived under someone else's roof would not understand how it really felt like. It was as though you were a guest and there would a fear of damaging things, or the owner might not let you use some of them. After a while, even though the place may be small, you would have subconsciously limited your own living space and act very cautiously. With hopes of no longer having to live under someone else's roof, Lu Shu started his training. After the second nebula had been unlocked, the amount of celestial energy needed to light up subsequent stars had increased exponentially. The rhythm was no longer that of lighting up one star every day. Furthermore, his self-training speed had reduced, and this wasn't due to his aptitude or him being lazy, but because he had to practice his swordplay at 3 a.m. every day. As a result, the training period at night was reduced. Li Xianyi must have considered this situation but was not as concerning to him. Improving swordplay at a steady rate was more important. He might not have realized that Lu Shu's training wasn't the yin-yang kinship of the three, but even though self-training time had decreased, he could still eat celestial fruits to make up for it. Others were envious that Lu Shu was given magical stones but never thought that he totally had no use for them. 2 stones a month were considered very little to him. Even if he could practice the yin-yang kinship of the 3, this small amount of resources wouldn't mean much. The Daoyuan students were still relying on others as they needed to wait for the heavenly network to impart them the methods and also to distribute training resources. While the heavenly network was in control of everything, Lu Shu was able to maintain his level of freedom. Without relying on anyone else, he could train with Lu Xiaoyu. This was the reason why he could secretly maintain his footing in this unpredictable and chaotic world. Without this foundation, what would he have to hide? Like the rest, he would have to fight his way to the top. As Lu Shu practiced his swordplay, Li Xianyi stood aside and watched quietly and started reminiscing about the times he was learning swordplay for his teacher. He was still young at that point in time, just turned 16 and playful. His teacher always allocated a certain amount of practice, but Li Xianyi was a lazy child. Told to do 1,000 swings, he would do 500 and claimed he finished, but his teacher never exposed him. Li Xianyi only found out later that 500 swings daily were enough. At that time, tens of swings would have already tired him out, and only by practicing a little at a time for a whole day could he complete it. Li Xianyi had thought that it was his own lacking or that he was too lazy and playful, only to find out that his teacher was just a very sly man. And now, he had wanted to use his teacher's tactic to teach Lu Shu but was shocked to find this young man seriously and properly completing 1,000 swings every day without fail. Given Lu Shu's this kind of metahuman's physique, completing 1,000 swings would not pose a problem, but the key point was full effort. Li Xianyi watched on with mixed feelings, and he never told Lu Shu that 500 swings were enough. Like a glass bottle, promises made were easily broken and words written down were also easily forgotten. Human beings are just forgetful creatures. But Lu Shu seemed to remember all the promises he spoke and hopes he had written down and used them to fuel his continuous effort. This young man was just as he said, doing his best to survive. There was one more thing he did not tell Lu Shu. In the era of scarce magical energy, they had to find an alternative, which was the use of their own body's vitality in place of magical energy to gain life-changing powers. He requested Lu Shu to practice swings mainly because that was the compulsory process in order to gather vitality. This was different from training, which you can rely on resources to do so, but swordplay, this was the legitimate kung fu achieved with your own efforts. You may be digging a canal for 3 years and no one could predict the results until the day the canal was finally connected. The water could then be transferred to the fields and the rewards can be reaped. Seeing Lu Shu's focus, this young man must be born with a strong vitality and could be incredibly focused on whatever he did. At this rate, the completion of the canal may be in the near future. The atmosphere between the two was rather quiet. Besides instructions and teaching Lu Shu the correct stance, Li Xianyi never said anything. Neither did Lu Shu. Lu Shu's swings were starting to improve. In the past, he felt that hitting someone was most effective when using your brute strength. But now he realized that to utilize 100% of your strength required training. It was like tennis lessons, where the teacher would never emphasize on your arm strength, but about the twisting of your waist, to convert the most power to your arms. After Lu Shu had realized this, he felt like he had unlocked a new realm of knowledge, and although it was tiring, it was meaningful. Li Xianyi saw Lu Shu's focus and thought that if he had been as hardworking as Lu Shu, he would have achieved class a much earlier. Before the completion of the canal, aptitude was useless and you could only wait and persevere. But Li Xianyi was looking forward to what Lu Shu can achieve upon his completion. Whether he had the perseverance to complete the canal and whether he had the aptitude to dig wide. In the morning sale of stinky tofu, Lu Shu once again carried out his usual act, which had started to provide a stable income of distress points. But this could not be a long-term solution. After agitating everyone for a period of time, they would not approach him anymore. His sales would not decrease as long as there was still tofu in his crate and customers can still see his unsold tofu. He would, however, need to constantly think of new ways to gain distress points from his customers. Lu Shu was really proud of himself to have thought of having an alternative plan. Who else could be as meticulous as him? Reaching the classroom, Lu Shu immediately glanced at Lu Li's hair. Wow, it's gotten lesser. Is Lu Li not concerned about his hair loss? Lu Shu felt that this class rep was going to the extremes in order to train. He thought for a moment before sending out a message on the group chat. Sudden death should not be teenagers' main concern, hair loss is. Lu Shu wanted to earn some distress points from Lu Li. After all, he was the kind of person who wouldn't even let those boys and girls on the message in a bottle off. But Lu Shu waited half a day and noticed Lu Li finally checking his phone. There weren't any distress points. What's going on? F***ck, did that scum block me? Lu Shu immediately direct messaged Lu Li, sudden death should not be teenagers' main concern, hair loss is. Lu Li was about to explode with anger. Damn you, I already blocked you on the chat group and you still. From Lu Li's distress, plus 999. Chapter 88. Lu Shu gleefully watched the income of distress points and was deeply grateful for this class rep of his. No one else could contribute so much distress points at once. Maybe it was due to an accumulation of his hatred over time? Similar to Jiwei, who constantly contributed +1/+1 distress points, but after the second encounter with him, it increased to +2/+2. Lu Shu even received a +2 distress points from Jiwei this morning. He pondered and decided to send the class rep another message, only to see a notification from the chat application. Daoyuan class Lu Li had private his account and you are not her friend. Please send a friend request first and only after the other party has accepted, you can then message him. Send a friend request. Daoyuan class Lu Li was the account name Lu Li gave himself. Announcing he's from Daoyuan class so he can boast about himself to others? Someone on the forums mentioned that recently, there were people doing this to ask girls out. The last line of the notification, send friend request, was a hyperlink that could be clicked on. Lu Shu took a deep breath. Look, this is the fate of the sheep you captured, all of the wool on the sheep's body had been pulled out. As he bitterly reflected on his actions, he clicked send friend request. Class rep, don't be too depressed. Although you're not that tall, your hairline is really up there. Lu Li had a pretty face and was dressed fashionably, but his height was only 170. This had always been the class rep's point of weakness. Lu Li was on the verge of snapping. You still dare to send me a friend request? Just what kind of power have you unlocked? I bet it must be something indecent. He swore to himself that once he rose to Class E, the first thing he would do was to humiliate Lu Shu. From Lu Li's distress, plus 1,000. Ho ho, another 1,000, are you trying to break him? Gotta stop agitating him or else he'd really awaken. Lu Shu suddenly realized that under normal circumstances, 999 was the limit, but with a bit more push, 1,000 was possible too. This meant that the real limit of each contribution of distress points was 1,000. Lu Shu was expecting Lu Li to block him straight away. He had tortured that sheep to death. But the class rep must be unable to swallow this insult, so there might still be a chance. Lu Shu did not care more as buying the house was the current priority. The landlord was surprised how Lu Shu could have earned the money, but Lu Shu said that he was a Daoyuan class student, and the landlord dropped his suspicions. From this, it seemed that Daoyuan class students were a really special existence. This situation only seemed natural as having superpowers would eventually equate to a high status. In addition, the Heavenly Network had a high standing in the society and there was a high demand for Daoyuan class students amongst the rich people. Prices of magical energy-related items were also surging on the markets and all these were linked to the Daoyuan class. Lu Shu was also not interested in purchasing magical energy-rich land as he had always stayed in that house. The landlord knew that Lu Shu had always wanted to buy the house but just did not have the money. The old landlord was a reasonable person and both parties were very understanding. Coincidentally, the landlord's son had just migrated abroad and the landlord was about to move over with him. Even the landlord's own house was listed on the market to be sold. Both parties discussed for an hour and Lu Shu had overestimated the price of the place. Although the location was good, the house was already an old building from the 70s and the housing prices in Luocheng, a third-class city, were not surging that quickly. Including the contract tax and furniture, it cost 242K and after some haggling, the final deal was 238K. The deed was done and in the afternoon, Lu Shu took leave to settle the contracts with the old landlord. Lu Shu only had one leave each week and the service center for mediating this exchange was not open on weekends. Lu Shu planned to settle this by today and also to buy a second-hand phone for himself and Lu Xiaoyu so that they could contact each other. Buying a house sounded simply but the process was much more complicated. Mainly, there were many documents and items to be prepared. After a busy day, Lu Shu held the agreement document and walked out of the service center. The process was not so simple and the house deed was still not collectible on the day. As he stood just outside the service center in the evening, he found the sunset in Luocheng to be alluring. This was a milestone in his life. His household register had been changed from the orphanage to this house, and once Lu Xiaoyu turned 16, hers would also be changed. Lu Shu was also the house owner. What a great feeling. Lu Shu excitedly went to the resale market and bought 2 handphones and 1 SIM card for Lu Xiaoyu. Once he reached his own yard, Lu Xiaoyu and Li Xianyi were sitting around a round table doing homework. Lu Shu, why are you back and what are you holding? Lu Xiaoyu was curious. From today onwards, this house belongs to us, Lu Shu calmly replied, but under his stable and unwavering voice were strong waves of emotions. Lu Xiaoyu was stunned for a moment. Really? Don't you bluff me, Lu Shu. Lu Shu raised up the agreement contract in his hand. Really, I'll be collecting the house deed in 15 days. Lu Xiaoyu jumped onto Lu Shu. You really bought it? Lu Shu, how did you get the money? Did you borrow it? I'll stop eating snacks and we can earn money together. I'll help with the stall. You don't have to give up your snacks. Come, let's look around our new house. Lu Shu carried Lu Xiaoyu, who was already clinging to him, along and entered the house. Upon entering, Lu Xiaoyu curiously started touching this and that as though it was a foreign place. In fact, she had been living here for over a year but, the feeling was different. In the past, it was a rented place but now, it was their own home. Although the summer was hot and the winter was cold, this was their home. Home. They finally had their own home. Li Xianyi stood in the yard next door as he watched this closely bonded sibling and thought, in this cold-hearted world, how rare is such a sight. He smiled. Xiao Shu bought this house down? I'm envious of your family. Li Xianyi had been wandering around the world his whole life until his illness struck him which forced him to remain here. There wasn't any feeling of family as his family wasn't around. In the afternoon, Lu Xiaoyu had a scene with Li Xianyi as she wanted to rest but Li Xianyi wanted her to finish the last 10 questions first. How annoying. Lu Xiaoyu scoffed as she pulled Lu Shu's hands and entered the house. Let's not talk to this senile 60-year-old who can't even do math questions. Li Xianyi? We were clearly having a moment. From Li Xianyi's distress, plus 188. Chapter 89. As Lu Xiaoyu got the phone, she looked as if she had just won a grand and mysterious prize. She inserted her phone card and the first thing she did was to give Lu Shu a call. She then excitedly saved her contact number on Lu Shu's phone as a Lu Xiaoyu. Then she took her own phone and saved Lu Shu's number as a Lu Xiao Shu. She continued playing with the 2 phones naively, thinking how apt and compatible the 2 names were. Lu Shu was silently watching by the side. Then he realized that Lu Xiaoyu had memorized his phone number and could recite it without even having to think. Lu Xiaoyu made them best friends on both of their phones, then pinned both Lu Shu and her contact on the top of both their chatting messages. Following that, she held onto the phones while thinking what else there was to do. Oh, yeah, the special caller ringtone. And wallpaper. And the lock screen wallpaper. Her actions were swift and sleek, as if she had thought of all these for a long time. It was as if Lu Xiaoyu had been reminding herself what she would do if she was given a phone. When Lu Shu got his phone back, he noticed his wallpaper was filled with photos of Lu Xiaoyu. And Lu Xiaoyu's was filled with photos of Lu Shu. Lu Xiaoyu looked worriedly at Lu Shu, afraid that he might change all of her new settings. To her surprise, Lu Shu didn't mind at all, and she returned to her playful self. She laid on the sofa and used her phone, with her legs resting on Lu Shu, pleased as ever. Lu Shu then added his card number on Lu Xiaoyu's WeChat. Our savings are all in there, don't use it carelessly. But if you really need it, you don't have to be too stingy. That bank account had a portion of Lu Shu's savings. He thought, if Lu Xiaoyu went missing and did not have any cash on her, she could use her phone to pay for a taxi ride home. Having heard that, Lu Xiaoyu nodded seriously, expressing that she wouldn't spend without thought. Lu Shu was also clear that Lu Xiaoyu's maturity was beyond her years and she definitely wouldn't make such silly mistakes. This made Lu Xiaoyu feel good. Lu Shu never doubted her or ever held her back from anything. It was natural for them to trust each other since they only had each other to depend on. If they can't even do this, how far could they go in life? Lu Shu also told Lu Xiaoyu, seeing as she was about to dim out her 7th star, to inform him if she could complete it that night. Lu Shu was extremely curious as to what will happen when Lu Xiaoyu completes her first nebula. Seeing Lu Xiaoyu's training progress, that would probably be the day after. Lu Shu asked Li Xianyi why he had to train swordplay at 3 in the morning. He thought this was a waste of his night time, which could be better used to cultivate his celestial map, but this couldn't be said to Li Xianyi. Li Xianyi's response left Lu Shu rather speechless. A long time ago, his master's chickens crowed at 3 in the morning, that's why he was used to training at 3. What? Lu Shu still thought there was a deeper philosophical meaning in the timing. It was because of such a reason? Through his time with Li Xianyi, Lu Shu found out that this old man was rather nice. Despite him being extremely skilled, he was not mysterious or arrogant. Li Xianyi told Lu Shu in the morning, swordplay stances can be ever-changing. Draw, dip, lift, cross, strike, poke, point, slash, smash, flick, and even more. But a true master only has one move, which is to defeat his opponent. What are swordplay techniques for? To be aesthetically appealing? No, they are for killing. Lu Shu was clear on this point. If it was just to look good, Lu Shu wouldn't be learning. To let you learn the foundation of swordplay is to let all this become your primary ability. Some might call muscle memory, but this is a misconception. Muscles have no memory, people do. Only when everything becomes your primary ability or reflex, the swordplay techniques can be learned effectively. Or else when you are in battle, when someone makes a move, you have to think for up to a second. By the time you are done thinking, you are probably done for as well. What you ought to do now is to follow this mantle. Use your waist as an axis, and the resonation of sword and hand. You already understand using your waist as an axis. As for the latter, it means to use your sword with flair and to feel it. Improve your chemistry with your sword and naturally you will improve. Having listened to a big chunk of talking, Lu Shu understood that he still had many techniques to learn even after he mastered the swing. And this morning, the old man told Lu Shu everything he had to say about vitality. His goal was to give Lu Shu hope, to let Lu Shu understand the meaning behind all the training. When you push a piece of rope on the table, it will only curve up on the spot. Only when you pull it from the front will it go wherever you want it to go. But Li Xianyi felt that his actions were slightly superfluous. When Lu Shu was training, he absolutely did not need any sort of motivation or supervision. And Lu Shu's circumstance was entirely different from his own when he was a student. He, in the past, had difficulty even lifting up the sword, a total beginner in swordplay. Lu Shu, on the other hand, had the strength of a metahuman, and who knew how much more of a head start Lu Shu had over him? Although it was tough to exert all his strength executing the swings, Lu Shu was determined and hardworking. Li Xianyi also noticed Lu Shu's improvement was much greater than his when he was younger. He executed the swings for 3 months before learning the next move. As for Lu Shu, Li Xianyi estimated that he could learn a new move next week. The current Lu Shu could execute the swings naturally, strong yet smooth. Every stroke of his was accurate and precise, and they all came from the waist through the arms to his wrist. Li Xianyi thought for a moment, this is probably related to Lu Shu's aptitude and class. As he thought about this, Li Xianyi was even more eager to find out Lu Shu's aptitude. He could not determine Lu Shu's aptitude accurately just by feel. Time passed by quickly, and Lu Shu's lifestyle of training persisted. Training on swordplay at 3 in the morning, selling tofu after that to earn some money and distress points. Following that he would attend lessons in school and report to Daoyuan class afterward. At night, he would get home for the lottery and cultivate his celestial map. This sort of life was simple and dull, but Lu Shu could still derive his own joy from it. And one day, Li Xianyi suddenly passed 2 small bottles to Lu Shu. Inside these bottles is the sodium-potassium alloy used to determine your aptitude. You try using it, I want to see what exactly is your aptitude. Lu Shu was stunned for a moment and rejected him. Are you kidding? We don't even have a teacher-student relationship. How could I do this test in front of you? In fact, Lu Shu did not know that Li Xianyi had already estimated him to be at a class potential, since he never mentioned this in front of Lu Shu. Li Xianyi understood Lu Shu's train of thought and waved his hand at Lu Shu. You test it yourself at home. Tell me what's your aptitude when you're done. Having finished his statement, Li Xianyi withdrew a small piece of paper from his sleeve. 6 different shades, from silver to black, were shown on the paper, each indicating a specific aptitude. Chapter 90. Previously, Lu Shu had wanted to buy 2 bottles of the sodium-potassium alloy to test his aptitude, but this stuff was almost out of stock online. Everyone who was interested in awakening or training wanted to see if they had the aptitude. And amongst everyone, adults had the most purchasing power. The Heavenly Network's plan never had much involvement with adults, and only those who had awakened were included. There were no tests or lessons catered to them, and this was suggesting that the Heavenly Network thought that people after a certain age no longer had the same potential. This meant that training did not only require aptitude but also an ideal age. But a new trend, which was great news to businessmen selling sodium-potassium alloys, became popular very quickly. Adults loved bragging about their aptitudes. This was like boasting within your circle of friends about your holiday, or what you ate, or about the things you bought. And the new trend was aptitude. Although they slowly understood the fact that they were past the age and unable to train, a good aptitude would still be a bonus that they could brag about it. So more and more people were buying sodium-potassium alloy at an inflated price just to be able to drip a drop of their blood, to check for their aptitude. Those who bragged did not care about their classes. As long as it was class F and above, they would spread the news to their circle of friends. Men would talk about how they wished the era came a few years earlier so they could take the path of training. Women would brag that they were born beautiful, etc. The tougher women would boast. I'm going up the mountains to train under the priest. If they reject me, I'd demolish Taoism. Awakening and training had become a trend. Of course, after the decent part of the trend was over, the indecent one started, and people would use black ink as their test results or even milk. And some sly businessmen would reduce the concentration of the sodium-potassium alloy to lower production costs. But the 2 bottles Li Xianyi gave him were different. It wasn't just a few millimeters, but the silvery fluid filled half the bottle. Since he gave 2 bottles, it must be for both him and Lu Xiaoyu to test. Lu Shu returned home to wake Lu Xiaoyu up and even closed the curtains to prevent outsiders from peeking at their secret. The power of the refresher fruits could finally be revealed. Lu Xiaoyu, still half awake, sat beside Lu Shu. Lu Shu, what do you want? Testing your aptitude, Lu Shu pulled her small hand over and was about to use the corpse of the dog to poke her finger. I'm not testing. Lu Xiaoyu was taken aback. Blood was needed for the test. From Lu Xiaoyu's distress, plus 110. Lu Shu took out 2 white rabbit sweets from his pocket and placed them in front of Lu Xiaoyu and quietly stared at her. Lu Xiaoyu struggled for a long while, add 2 more. Without hesitation, Lu Shu gave her a whole packet and made a cut smaller than a grain of rice on Lu Xiaoyu's finger and dripped her blood into the bottle of the sodium-potassium alloy. Then it was his own blood. He previously realized that the corpse of the dog was extremely sharp. Any normal cooking knives or of sorts would not be able to hurt him at all, but when his hard and enhanced skin came into contact with the corpse of the dog, it was like tofu. Lu Xiaoyu had 2 white rabbit sweets on one side of her mouth, as the 2 of them sat quietly on the sofa waiting for the sodium-potassium alloy's reaction. The silver-colored alloy slowly turned black and the change was quick. Comparing to the hues of black, their aptitudes jumped from Class F, Class E, Class D, Class C, Class B, Class A. Although Lu Shu was mentally prepared, he was still shocked by the results. Both their aptitudes had reached Class A. How good was Class A? In the whole of Luo Chang's Daoyuan class, only Chao Qingxi was Class A. According to this, they must be 1 in a million talents. But at this moment, Lu Shu suddenly noticed a strange reaction happening in both bottles. In his bottle, the alloy reached its blackest peak and slowly turned back to silver and started glowing. The glow was bright and beautiful like the stars and also glaring. And in Lu Xiaoyu's bottle, the black color remained black, but the black was like that of a never-ending deep dark abyss. What kind of situation is that? It wasn't written on the spectrum. Lu Shu was confused. Just what were his and Lu Xiaoyu's aptitudes? He was confident that they were Class As, but now he wasn't sure. My bottle is quite similar to my celestial map. You? Lu Shu curiously asked. Mine too, Lu Xiaoyu mumbled as the 2 sweets were still in her mouth. Seemed like it was the celestial map's mystery again. He also never got to test the changes to the alloy before eating those refresher fruits. It was too late now. So? Above Class A is Class S? Lu Shu was very curious. They sealed both their bottles and planned to pour it away outside when no one was around. Lu Shu left the house and met Li Xianyi, who asked, "What class?" Lu Shu shook his head and sighed, "Both Class F." His acting skill is not bad. Lying with his eyes wide open and even with some details. From Li Xianyi's distress, plus 144. But the old man was starting to think that Lu Shu's aptitude must be out of the ordinary, if not why the need to hide. His main objective was not to find out Lu Shu's aptitude as he trusted his own judgment, but it was for Lu Shu to know his own so that he would not be depressed about having a Class F aptitude. Vitality training required confidence in every aspect, and this was Li Xianyi's goal. Lu Shu knew that Li Xianyi wanted to take Lu Xiaoyu as a disciple to inherit his ideals and responsibilities, but as an older brother, Lu Shu was against it. He only had this one younger sister, so how could he let her take part in some rescuing the world mission? If Lu Shu had no other choice, he might just become Li Xianyi's disciple. But what was the current situation? Since both of them did not lack training and Lu Xiaoyu could train even while she was sleeping and the Golden Foundation relationship with the Heavenly Network was still uncertain, he was not willing to take the risk. Lu Shu suddenly recalled something, "Grandpa, towards the end of your swordplay training, will I be able to manipulate the sword?" Li Xianyi gave him a glance and casually manipulated a blade of grass to fly across which like a flying needle embedded itself into a wooden fence a distance away and said sarcastically, "If you wish to learn to manipulate, you need to be at least Class C."
What does it mean to be happy? 'Cause it looks like we all don't know. Glass half full or empty. Man, we just putting on the show. Try to look to the heavens to tell us things